Is coming after your money. That's bad. We all know that the right thing to do is to pay for your taxes, right? And some South Africans are choosing not to pay, while the South African Revenue Services is waging a war on non-compliance. Joining me on the line is Head of Strategic Engagement and Compliance at Tax Consulting SA. That's Jashwin Baijoo. Jashwin, a very good morning and welcome to the show.
Morning, Africa. Morning to the listeners. Thanks for having me on.
It's not under recovery because it sounds inappropriate, but there's a budget that the finance minister presents in February, and part of that budget is a projection of how much money in taxes and revenue they will be able to get from you and I and companies and everyone who has to pay taxes. And we know from the medium-term budget policy statement that unfortunately we're tracking below what the minister had shared in February, and that's due to a whole lot of reasons, including people who are not actually compliant. And what we're saying this morning is that beware, because the Revenue Services is coming after you, correct?
Yeah, correct. And I mean, Africa, but just because I like you, I'm going to let you use my terminology for this one. I call that shortfall the fiscal pothole.
The fiscal pothole?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Like every other pothole, every time it starts getting filled up, it just becomes a pothole again.
Why is that, I wonder, Jashwin?
So the thing is, in a country like South Africa, and we've actually seen this in many of your African states, that not only is there a brain drain that ends up more in the EU states. So I mean, probably our top poaching country for South Africa is the Netherlands, right? Now, that is simply because in these states you are getting top-level talent at half the price as you would for local Netherlands talent. That's just one example. And then your other example is simply a massive, massive exodus of wealthy individuals, so your high wealth individuals. And further to that, you are seeing an exit of the middle class in South Africa. The guys that are probably about 25 to 35, starting out in their careers, and they are exiting South Africa. So that tax base shrinkage is a massive contributing factor to this pothole as well.
Which then places a lot of pressure on the Revenue Services to make sure that every single rand and cent that is due to be paid by South Africans and companies in South Africa, that they get as much of that money as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And on that basis, the Revenue Service is then forced to ramp up their collection measures, ramp up their crackdown or their war on non-compliance. And how they're doing that is, one, more aggressive collections, in the sense that standard processes that have been around for years, like final demands, are now being followed through on more aggressively and more surgically. And two, they're implementing new and enhanced collections and compliance processes.
And how effective are those, Jashwin? Are we starting to see that percentage of non-compliance as a share of the total tax base reducing?
So according to SARS media statements and statistics reports, we are seeing non-compliance decreasing, but that is on a per taxpayer basis. So the quantity of non-compliant taxpayers has decreased. But remember, that does not necessarily translate to the outstanding debt being reduced. It may just be a case that SARS have gone after the low-hanging fruit. Africa, the everyday taxpayer like you and I. The guys that don't necessarily have the deep pockets to litigate against a monster like SARS. And we've seen in the news that they've made examples of local celebs That's been evidence over the last 12 months. I mean, you think about your Patricia Noahs and most recently business tycoon Sidambe. SARS are not pulling any punches. But at the same time, as we mentioned, with that tax base shrinkage, there's a high volume of skills exiting South Africa, which means even SARS internally does have a skills shortage to actually combat non-compliant and complex tax and offshore, like your loop structures, your trust structures, etc., to actually unwind those and get to the crux of the tax issues. SARS does not necessarily have that capacity.
We saw that capacity being disabled, actually, in the last decade or so. And if you read the volumes of state capture report following, just over 4 years of testimony and submissions, you certainly understand why that was the case. Do we have an understanding of why people are not paying tax? There was a point, I suppose, where people are going, wait a minute, given the amount of corruption there is in this country, I'm going to, withhold my tax and not pay it, which was sad because SARS was one of the best performing agents of government, for lack of a better word, for quite some time.
Yeah, correct. I mean, if you're cycling back about a decade or more, SARS at one stage was one of the top 3 revenue authorities in the world. And with the modernization of their systems, the usage of AI, you see SARS coming to the party in a number of things, such as the crypto asset reporting framework. OECD, they just recently signed on there as well. And it's a case of, under the guidance of Commissioner Kieswetter, SARS really have stepped up their game. They are climbing that mountain to get back to their former glory of being one of the most revered revenue authorities in the world. But from the taxpayer perspective, and look, I've had many chats with some of the very senior officials at SARS. Most recently was Mark Kingan, and we've had many chats about building taxpayer confidence and trust and transparency and accountability between the Revenue Authority and taxpayers, vice versa. And when you ask me the question of why many taxpayers feel like they don't need to pay their taxes, that question kind of boils down to a lot of taxpayers of the mindset, our current individual tax system, at least, that works on a bracket-based percentage of taxation, comes across as punitive. Taxpayers, and I can say this comfortably because many clients have actually told me this, they feel like they're being punished. The more you work, the harder you work, the more successful you are and try to build a better life for your family, the higher you get taxed. And that is the taxpayer mindset.
Which certainly resonates with many listeners to Cape Talk and 702, no doubt. Jashwin, thank you very much indeed for your insights and for your time this morning. Jashwin Baijoo is the Head of Strategic Engagement and Compliance at Tax Consulting.